Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Good. Listen, tell me, do you think I am wrong to think that the New York Times, in this story that appeared over the weekend about Hamas, got things subtly but consequentially wrong? The headline is Hamas leader reaffirms stance on Israel. Now, the headline is true to the piece, certainly, because the lead paragraph says that, quote, a Hamas leader said the group had no intention of recognizing Israel's right to exist. But this surprised me, because for one thing, the night before on the Charlie Rose show, I had seen a Hamas spokesman who seemed to say that if Israel met certain preconditions, Hamas would be willing to reconsider its longstanding refusal to recognize Israel.
Does Hamas support the right of Israel, or will it come to support the right of Israel to exist?
Well, I believe we have to hear something clear about the right of the Palestinian people to have their own right.
To have their own state?
From the we have to hear from the other side a real recognition of the Palestinian right.
So if the Palestinians can have their own state, then they will recognize the right of Israel
to exist. I believe the first step is supposed to be taken from the other side, because he's the occupier. He's the side who occupied the Palestinian land.
Now, granted, that is not the Hamas spokesman that the New York Times story was about. The Times story focused on a different Hamas guy, Mahmoud Zahar, who is known to be the more radical of the two Palestinian leaders of Hamas. But even so, the tenor of the Times story surprised me, because I had seen, on the very day that the Times story was reported, I had seen footage of Mahmoud Zahar on PBS News, and he seemed to be more conciliatory than the Times story suggested. In fact, according to the interpretation of the PBS reporter, he was now saying that under certain circumstances he would consider dialogue with Israel, which is something that traditionally Hamas had unconditionally ruled out.
Up to this moment, if the Israeli has something to fulfill the basal demand of the Palestinian people concerning the occupied territories, concerning the detainees, concerning the question of Jerusalem and other national interests, we are going to reevaluate these arguments.
Okay, so there, Zahar is saying that under some circumstances Hamas would, quote, reevaluate this argument. On the same day, the New York Times has him reaffirming his stance on Israel. So why the contrasting kind of spins? Interestingly, kind of way down in the Times article, there actually is a Zahar quote that's comparable in tone to the PBS quote. He says, if Israel has anything to bring to the Palestinian people, we will consider this, but we are not going to give anything for free. But the Times reporter chose to focus on a different Zahar quote. It's in the second paragraph, and this is the entire basis for the lead paragraph and the whole spin of the story. Zahar says, why are we going to recognize Israel? Is Israel going to recognize the right of return of Palestinian refugees? Is Israel going to recognize Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital? Now, it's hard to interpret this. It's ambiguous, and besides, Zahar doesn't speak great English. But it seems to me that at least a plausible interpretation of what he's saying is that when he says, why are we going to recognize Israel? Is Israel going to recognize the right of return of Palestinian refugees? Is that that's analogous to my saying, why should I apologize to Mickey Kaus for calling him a right-wing zealot? Is he going to apologize to me for calling me a woolly-minded one-worlder? Now, if I said that, I wouldn't be saying that I unconditionally refuse to apologize. I'd be saying I may apologize if you apologize. And that's very different. And if Hamas, if Zahar is saying the equivalent of that, then that's significant, because that's a departure from the traditional position of making the rejection of Israel's right to exist unconditional. Now, leave aside how ridiculous the conditions he's laying out here may be, because they certainly are unrealistic. Still, there is a difference between the long-standing Hamas position of unconditional rejection of Israel, and unconditional refusal to even talk to Israel, and laying down conditions for doing these things. And it seemed to me more generally that the story coming out of the remarks of Hamas leaders in the days right after the election was that they were, at least to some extent, recalibrating their traditional position. Not dramatically, not sufficiently, but markedly, and in a way as dramatically as you could expect them to maneuver within a period of a few days, given the domestic political constraints and given their long-standing firm positions on these issues. But no major paper, so far as I know, played the story the way that I saw it. So who knows? I mean, maybe I'm splitting hairs. You tell me, Mickey. Am I crazy to complain about this? Probably so, right?
Well, Bob, some of the demands that they were making were incompatible with the existence of the State of Israel. For example, a right of return. If you had a right of return, the Arabs would outnumber the Jews, and Israel would no longer be a Jewish state. Effectively, it would cease to exist. It's also not clear that they don't still endorse what's tantamount to a one-state solution, which also means that Israel wouldn't exist. Now, this is a moment when they have to look good in the eyes of the world, so the Times story was misleading, but they're probably... the moderation is sort of false too. They're probably trying to be.
First of all, whether the moderation was false is not the question, because the Times story is that there has been no superficial moderation. The question we're addressing is, has there even been superficial moderation? I'm arguing yes.
There's been a moderation in tone, yes.
That's the only question, because the Times was reporting on tone, on what was happening on the surface. Now, as for the fact that the things they're laying out as the preconditions for recognizing Israel being unrealistic, they absolutely are. I mean, in the end, Israel is not going to grant a complete right of return. So you can certainly say that if these are their preconditions for recognition, then their negotiating position is a non-starter. But the fact is, it's news if there even is a negotiating position that Hamas has. That's my point. They traditionally have not. And if they're even saying there's anything that could be done to alter their long-standing position, it seems to me that's the story.
No, I agree. I think that is the story, but it could just be that they're, laying low and they're going to hang tough in negotiations, and the abolition of Israel will be resurrected.
Absolutely, could be for all we know, but that's not the issue here. I just think, clear reporting at this point is very important. This is a really fluid period in history. As Matt Iglesias said right here on Blogging Heads TV a few days ago, the current government of Israel doesn't want to engage Hamas, so they didn't even really want to engage the Palestinian Authority before the elections. And so they're going to be trying to play down any Hamas overture. And I'm just saying, we don't need the best and most influential newspaper in the world to be helping them out unduly.
I agree, but I think that story will be quickly forgotten in yesterday's rubbish if it becomes clear that what you say is right.
No major paper that I've seen has conveyed the tenor of the clips I showed, which is that in general, leaders of Hamas are going out of their way to avoid reiterating the traditional Hamas position.
There's a cycle. The first beat of the story is, oh, it's terrible, these terrorists have won. The second beat is, wait, it may be a good thing they'll moderate. And the third beat, which was on the Times, as you pointed out, is, wait, they're still terrorists.
Well, what worries me is I think it's something else. I think the reporters covering the story naively think that it's conceivable that Hamas could, within 24 hours or a week or 2 or 3 weeks, completely repudiate everything it has always stood for. There's no way they're going to come out and say, oh, we recognize Israel now. The question is, how do you keep the dialogue going long enough for them to plausibly do that, and when they do it, actually mean it? That's the challenge. And if reporters are going out there thinking the question is, are they going to completely transform themselves overnight? Well, of course not. The question is, does it look like it is their long-term goal to at least leave that possibility open? Are they calibrating their position in that way? And so far as I can tell, the answer is yes, but the reporting we're seeing is saying no.
But that's what I didn't understand about you and Matt's dialogue is you assume that the way to get them to eventually moderate is to sort of be nice to them.
Is that the topic-ending bell going on?
That's the topic-ending bell, but since I'm talking,
tell us to take a little nap. The fate of the world is at stake here.
And Hamas equals ratings for us.
Oh, yeah.
We know that. It's like
that and
lesbians.
Brokeback Mountain are our meal tickets.
It's like lesbians on Howard Stern. My point is, you're not going to get them to agree by not demanding that they recognize Israel. Yet when people say we expect them to recognize Israel, people say, oh, you're being tough, give them time to breathe. Well, the way you get them to concede is by honest negotiation, where you frankly state what your views are, and they bring whatever force and negotiating power they have to bear, and you eventually reach some sort of self-interested compromise. And that's what lets them reach the compromise with dignity, that you haven't bent over backwards to be nice to them.
Well, compromise with dignity is a key phrase, but what I would stress, and I'm not saying you should be anything less than candid with them about what you're demanding. I think, though, you have to make a distinction between what you say in public and what you say to them in private. Because if you say, we are going to withdraw all funding unless you recognize Israel, that only makes it less easy politically for them to do that. I think what Bush should do, and no signs that this is what's happening, is be publicly vague and privately clear. Publicly, I think they should say, look, unless Hamas changes its tune in the long run, this just can't be business as usual, and we can't keep giving the Palestinian Authority the kind of support we've given it. Be vague in public. In private, say to them, look, you've got 6 months to recognize Israel. Tell us if there's anything we can do to help, and we'll tell you whether that's doable. But, in 6 months, the money stopped. But you say all that privately, because, and we've already seen some of this blowback from ill-advised public demands. Some Hamas leaders are always saying, no, we're not going to be intimidated into recognizing Israel. It just does not signify an understanding of human nature to make all these demands publicly.
It seems to me each side is allowed its strong for show PR statement to please its base, and then they can get down to negotiating. I wouldn't hold Hamas's anti-Israel statements against it. But the three main parties,
Israel, the Palestinians, and George Bush, Bush is the one who right now does not urgently need to gratify his base. Israel's got elections coming up, so they're going to have to be careful about what they say. In Palestine, it's a very fragile political situation, so they're under huge pressure. Bush is the guy that's got leeway. He can afford to seem large-hearted publicly, and he should be very strict privately.
It helps. First, it helps Bush to keep AIPAC and the neocons at least.
He's not facing re-election. He doesn't have to worry about AIPAC for the next few months.
You always have to worry about AIPAC if you're dealing with the Middle East. They're a powerful force, and you have to bring them along too. And the second thing is, isn't it illegal for us to fund Hamas if they're on the terrorist list? So you have to confront that issue right away. We can't just keep writing them a check.
Well, I think there are ways of technically getting around it, because Hamas does not equal the Palestinian Authority. The president is still non-Hamas, and I think there are technical ways to get around. I don't know. It's a good question. But as for what's smart to do and what's not smart to do, I think Bush is the guy who has enough political leeway right now to be deft, and I'm not confident that he's going to be deft, and I'm getting more and more pessimistic every day. And more generally, on the question of human nature, I want to stress, my in principle optimism about something good possibly flowing out of Hamas's election victory does not rest, as a lot of people seem to think, on some kind of romantic, naive view of human nature. It's exactly the opposite. It's pure Darwinian cynicism. I believe that people, and males especially, are extremely attracted to social status and power. And that certainly includes the leaders of Hamas. Now, until this election, the prerequisites for them getting social status and power included saying death to Israel every 3 minutes and blowing people up. Now they're in a completely different context. They're being catapulted onto the international stage. In principle, they can wind up addressing the UN General Assembly and all kinds of things and reach much higher social status and more prestige, but they're going to have to moderate their stance to do so. And moreover, if they want to even stay in power for very long where they are, they're going to have to heed the opinion of their own base, the people who elected them, who by and large on this issue are more moderate than they are. So I have a completely cynical view of the situation. If I'm wrong in my optimism, it's because I'm being too cynical.
Okay.
But I wanted to be clear on what the logic is here.
I don't think anybody accused you of being too idealistic. it's also a Marxist cynicism. I mean, your whole hope for the future of radical Islam is that it's not just male social status, it's that if these countries want to be prosperous, they have to be part of the global trading economy, which means they'll have to make certain accommodations with the market economy that the strictest forms of Islam are unwilling to make. And we're assuming that people want to be rich and that that'll happen.
Well, that's part of wanting to have high status and be powerful and so on. I mean, they're all related. But I certainly do believe, yes, if you change the base, you can change the superstructure. As Marxists say, of course, the difference between me and the Marxists is I think capitalism is ultimately the ticket here, because it leads to the interdependence of various kinds of people, and I hope we'll see that unfold with Hamas too. You know, it's going to require, it's going to need trade from other countries, and for a long time, aid from other countries.
It is,
and that's going to depend on moderation.
It is being very cynical about the power of religion. Religion's, you know, purely the player that dances to the tune of status in the economy and individuals seeking their self-interest, and if their self-interest can be sought in other ways, and religion will give way. I agree with it, but we may be underestimating the power of actual religion here.
Well, and there's also the time frame question. How, you know, religions, all these religions have changed, all the Abrahamic religions have changed so much over time that there's no doubt that they can undergo tremendous changes. The question is, what is the time frame and what are the circumstances conducive to change? But that's why I think if we want this to happen very fast, we have to be very careful. And so far as I can tell, Bush is not inclined to be careful. He wants to say publicly, you know, do it my way or the highway. I just think it's a bad time to say that publicly, although you should say it privately.
It's not obvious to me that he's screwed it up completely yet.
No, he hasn't screwed it up completely. I just haven't seen the subtlety I'd like to see. We'll see.
Okay.
It's kind of like you backtracking on your Brokeback Mountain prediction. You know, I was at one point expressing optimism about the implications of a Hamas victory, and I'm retreating toward pessimism as I see the opportunity being what I consider to be mishandled.
I'm glad I've been a role model to you.
In so many ways, man. I can't quit you.
I knew you'd sneak that in somehow. Okay, let's pretend that this thing has gone off. The State of the Union is coming up on Tuesday.
Boy, am I excited. Do you have a preview for us, Mickey?
Well, no. If Bush wanted to lower expectations, he's done a very good job. There have been all these leaks saying no major initiatives planned. It looks like the major initiatives are some relatively insignificant healthcare tax breaks that will at least bring up the topic of healthcare, but nothing much. And yet it's become a big deal. I mean, in the New York Times, we had Richard Stevenson saying, after 5 tumultuous years in office, Bush must show that his administration is not exhausted and bereft of ideas. Well, why must he show that? Why is the New York Times declaring that he must show that? If he doesn't show it, he's still president for 3 more years. He's still running the Iraq War. You know, so he has a little less power in Congress. His party controls Congress, so it's probably not going to make much of a difference. In fact, the whole fuss over the State of the Union is hard to understand. Why has it become such a big deal? Why are there State of the Union viewing parties all over the country? I have an explanation.
I don't know. Why wasn't I invited in is my question. But what's your explanation?
It's the Feiler Faster theorem again. It's the idea that we now are so efficient at processing information that we have the capacity to make a big deal of things we didn't have the time for before. So all these, you know, bogus secular holidays like Halloween and Valentine's Day and even St. Patrick's Day that weren't a big deal before are now suddenly a huge deal because we're able to, you know, coordinate and process all the information and have time for a big St. Valentine's Day brouhaha. And the State of the Union has become another big political brouhaha. We have all these people sitting around ready to generate information, writing for the Note, writing for the newspapers. They have to make a fuss about this or else they'll have nothing to write about it. And we have a much, much greater capacity to consume it than we did before.
Well, I'm not sure I get it. I mean, I feel like because things are going faster and faster, I have less spare time than ever. That's why I won't watch the State of the Union address. I almost never do. I do think, you know, so you're pointing to something, though, that it is a very pernicious influence, the kind of the chronicness of the monitoring of the political horse race now. I think the obsessive attention to who's up and who's down has made politicians more conscious of it, even when they don't need to be, even when there's not an election for a year or two, and that just leads to bad governance.
It's most comically represented in CNN's Situation Room, this ignoring the Middle East peace for a fire in Cincinnati. I mean, Albert Brooks does this very funny routine where he mocks Wolf Blitzer saying, yes, our correspondent in Jerusalem, enough about Middle East peace. Do you know anything about this fire in Cincinnati?
Oh, man. The other day I was on the treadmill at the health club. I was watching CNN. It was 2 days after the Palestinian election. I was so obsessed with the issue. And there was something on CNN I didn't care about. And they say, oh, news break. There's a roof collapse in Poland. Now, look, I'm sorry about the people who died in this thing. But the idea that was one of the most, 1,000 most important things going on at that time in the world is crazy.
Okay, so we
agree on everything as usual.
We agree on everything. How come you and I agree and you and Iglesias agree, but I don't agree with Iglesias?
It's a tribute to my, some would say, flexibility, some would say malleability, some would say utter lack of spine.
That must be it. Okay, new topic.
And what is it?
Income inequality.
But wait, on the subject of income inequality, shouldn't you be on the right where you normally are?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry. So I've been invited to talk at a conference on income inequality by a left-wing organization, a sort of Clintonite organization, the Center for American Progress. And they put out a sort of interesting book called Inequality Matters, which I'll hold up to the camera here. And the thesis of it is, why, it's a standard thing, why don't Americans care about money inequality, income inequality? And the second theme is that income inequality, we have so much equality not because it's an accident or a force of nature, but because we've politically chosen to have that level of inequality. And I pretty much disagree with all of that. I think instead of emphasizing income inequality or what I call money inequality, liberals should talk about social equality. That for one thing, social equality is something we can achieve. Income inequality we will never achieve because, point two, the level of inequality we have is not really a product of political choice. It's the product of deep underlying economic trends that we can do nothing to change if we want to be prosperous.
It doesn't mean there aren't political choices that couldn't moderate it a little without it bringing catastrophe to the economy, right?
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean, one of the trends is we pay more for skills and education than we used to because skills and education count for more in a modern productive economy. I think if you stop paying more for people with more skills, you're going to end up with a poor performing economy. Whether or not, and that trend happens whether or not we close our borders to international trade, which would be a calamity in and of itself. That's another way that's proposed this is a choice somehow because we've chosen not to be protectionist. Therefore, we're open to globalization and low-wage workers are taking all our low-wage abroad or taking all our low-skilled jobs, which is happening. But it would happen anyway, even if the borders were closed. Internally, capitalism just requires people to pay more for skills, and unskilled workers wind up at the bottom competing with each other. Okay, fine, but what about a more
progressive income tax?
That would moderate it a bit, but we'd have, in order to... When I wrote my book in 1992, it would have taken a tax more progressive than Sweden to just bring us back to where we had been 20 years earlier.
Well, then we'll settle for less than that.
We're not going to have a tax, and Sweden's going in the other direction, so we're not going to have a tax progressive enough to counteract the basic inequality generated by capitalism. The strategy should be, look, why do we care about income inequality in the first place? Because it leads to people lording it over each other and thinking they're superior to each other and not being equal in the eyes of each other. And why not attack that problem directly? The way you attack that problem directly is by lowering crime so people can mingle in public spaces, having good schools where enough of all classes can mix and where people at least have something close to equal opportunity, and having certain spheres of life, like the draft used to be, I propose where healthcare could be, where people are treated as equal. If we do those three things, we'll achieve more for the real goal, which is social equality, than if we try to change the income distribution, which we're never going to be able to do anyway.
I'm all for social equality. It does seem to me you're viewing the thing in unnecessarily binary terms. Like you say, well, we can't completely reverse the trends toward income inequality, so let's put all of our emphasis on social equality and none on greater income equality. It seems to me, you do what you can, and you concede there are some things you can do in the realm of income inequality. And the other thing is, I think you may overestimate how much you can do in the realm of social equality. You're well aware of the various trends that are making it easier, some of them technological, for people to sort themselves out and have fewer random encounters and confine themselves to encounters with like-minded people of like income and like vocation and so on. And
I used to think that was happening because everybody was moving into gated communities because they were scared of crime. But then the crime problem got better, and people who moved behind gated communities seemed like fools. Because what were they running away from? There's value in common interaction, and I think most Americans realize that. Now, gated communities are making a small comeback, so you may be right that there's an evil trend there. My point is that if you want social equality, an institution like the draft, for example, where you have John F. Kennedy serving next to welders and working class people in World War II, is so much more powerful in guaranteeing social equality than all the income equality we could ever hope to achieve. I say it's like on a radio there are two dials. There's the one for the gross changes, and then there's a vernier dial for make the fine changes. Changing income inequality or making it more equal is like changing the dial that doesn't really have much impact on social equality. Having good schools, good health care, and lowering crime is like changing the big dial. It produces huge results compared with raising the effective top tax rate from 28 to 32%. I mean, that has a negligible impact on social equality.
And what political chance would you say there is for instituting a draft like right now when there's an actual war going on, so rich kids would die if they didn't invade the draft?
There's zero chance. That's why I nominate health care as the sector that treats everybody equally the way the draft did. When my father was sick, he had cancer. He went to a cancer ward. It was a very good cancer ward. He was a big shot in the legal world. He was treated side by side with people who weren't big shots at all, and it was fine. It was a solidaristic experience. And one of the problems I have with what Bush is going to announce in his State of the Union is not that it's going to be a disaster like the prescription drug plan, which it might be, but that it will put everybody on their own and lead to an inevitable tiering of health care. So the situation that my father experienced, we will not experience, and it will go away. I don't think it has to be the draft. It doesn't have to be health care. There just has to be enough of a public sphere to enforce the idea that we're really all equal.
Okay, there is one other feature of the modern economy that makes me a little pessimistic about this social equality business, and that is it's not the number of service jobs being performed for upper middle class and upper class people in suburbia, but the number of low-skill service jobs. I mean, there's a big difference between the relationship you have with somebody like a plumber or electrician who comes to your house with knowledge you don't have and does things you can't do, and your relationship with somebody who comes and does the leaf blowing and the lawn mowing and things that really you could do, you just don't have the time. And sometimes I think that's the reason that some low-income blacks are more reluctant to do those kinds of jobs than, say, recent immigrants from Latin America or somewhere, because of the connotations that those jobs have in terms of your relative status.
Absolutely.
It's just psychologically more problematic for somebody who's been black in America to accept that role than for somebody who hasn't.
Absolutely. And one of the ways a good gauge of social equality is how many people have maids. And I think it hit a low of 8% in the 80s, and it's crept back up to 12%, but it's nowhere near where it was, in the 50s, 40s, and 30s when
really?
a third, yeah.
Shocking. And they would have been mainly blacks in the 30s and 40s, right? Or largely.
in general, there's also a trend toward labor-saving appliances that eliminate the need for that sort of servant. And the other thing is there's a professionalization of those types of servants, so that even somebody who's just basically does your bidding sort of becomes a household manager. And if there's a tight labor market, you can't treat your household manager like crap because you're just happy he shows up and does the job.
Yeah.
During the Clinton, one of the things the Democratic left ignores is the success of the Clinton years, the transformation that happened when we had those 4 years of artificially tight labor markets, where basically if somebody showed up and did half a decent job, you were so grateful to them that there's no way you were going to lord it over them. And you were going to pay them well, too, and wages at the bottom started to go up. Why isn't the Democratic strategy, we want that back? Seems to me that's the... But I agree, there's this trend in the other direction.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I still favor doing what you can on income inequality, and I don't believe there's as much as that it's wise to do as a lot of people on the left do. I'm against protectionism. I mean, my hobby horse is I'd rather organized labor exert its influence in international forums like trying to change the WTO and so on, but that's a whole other sermon.
I think it's easier to sell Americans on social equality. I mean, one of the quotes in my book is a quote from a politician who said, we're all equal in the eyes of God, but as Americans, that's not enough. We have to all be equal in the eyes of each other. He wasn't saying, he wasn't for formal legal equality, he wasn't for equal opportunity. He said we have to actually be equal in the eyes of each other. And the politician who said that was Ronald Reagan. Well, if you can appeal to a Reaganite sentiment, you're going to have a lot easier time getting done what you want to get done than if you say, we also want to achieve greater income equality, which most Americans don't accept.
Yeah.
So go for the thing that they accept.
I say do what you can do. But anyway, we once again shown tendencies toward convergence, I think.
That's distressing. Well, we'll have to talk to our bosses at the network.
Yeah, see whether the advertisers are happy with this.
Okay, we can have a retreat.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. See ya.